Hey there, I'm Chris Folmsbee, Senior Director, Discipleship and Interim Student Ministries Director at Church of the Resurrection. Welcome back to Confirmation for parents or grandparents or guardians or whoever else desires to invest in the spiritual life of your student. You know, when we take a look at the world around us, it doesn't take long to see that things are, let's say, not as they should be. There's war, there's murder and racism and unrest and poverty and human pain and suffering and sickness and disease and slavery and brokenness of many other forms and kinds. Well, why is that? Well, when God created humans in God's image, we were also given the freedom and the ability to choose to obey God or not, to choose to follow our own way. This freedom is what we call free will. Essentially, we have the freedom and the ability to love God back or not, and in some cases, people choose to exercise their free will to make bad decisions, to hurt or harm one another, or to rebel against God's intended ways in some other way. We refer to this as sin. But once again, as you might imagine, it all comes back to our relationship with God and God's grace. Our God is a uniquely relational God, and as human beings, we are never forced to be in relationship with God. We have the choice to use our free will to choose God or to reject God and choose our own ways, which, as you know, when we do, often ends up poorly for all of us. But when we choose to reject God's intended ways and follow our own way, we break God's heart and we cause a broken relationship between ourselves and God, ourselves and others perhaps, and even between ourselves and creation. This is the main point of today's confirmation lesson. And at one point in the story of God, the sinfulness and brokenness within humanity became so bad that God chose to completely start over, you might say. We read this in Genesis chapter 6, 5 through 6. The Lord saw that humanity had become thoroughly evil on earth, and that every idea their minds thought up was also completely evil. The Lord regretted making human beings on earth, and he was heartbroken. Now that sounds pretty bad, because it is, but did you catch the last word there? God was heartbroken. Even at humanity's worst, lowest point, God at no point disowns human beings. He never stops loving us, even when heartbroken. Of course, heartbreak comes from a place of love and concern anyway, and I'm sure that you sometimes feel that way with your own kids, that there's a big tension in the story of God, but the story of God is that God loves us, and yet we often choose to ignore that love and to choose to love our own selves rather than God. When we ignore that love, it can result in sin. Fortunately for us, as you know, that's not the end of the story. There's God's grace and love. This week, your students are going to be challenged to offer an apology to someone. Maybe that someone will even be you, we don't know. But to engage them in conversation this week, we want to ask that you ask your student these two questions. Number one, how does sin, like lying or cheating, hurt the relationship between two or more people? And then question two, how can we start to fix broken relationships that have been hurt by sin or brokenness? Don't forget to check out the additional resources in the video description below.